Welcome to Following the Gong, a podcast for Schreyer Scholars, bringing you mentoring on demand from Scholar Alumni. I'm your host, Sean Goheen, and our guest today is Reed Taylor, class of 2014, who is a chemical engineer and a consultant who turned into an entrepreneur. You can read his full bio in the description wherever you are engaging with us today. Reed, thank you for joining us here all the way from Connecticut.
Thank you, Sean. Happy to be here.
I like your shirt. I appreciate when somebody is on brand with the Penn State gear. And speaking of Penn State, obviously this is a Penn State podcast. So tell us at the very beginning here, how did you end up coming to Penn State and becoming a Schreyer Scholar?
So I was a math and science kid, and I went to a high school that was a magnet school for math and science down in Virginia. And it required us to do a junior year research project. Very similar. It's like a mini version of the Schreyer Thesis. I had a little prep for that. So as part of that project, I had partnered with Penn State's nuclear engineering department to irradiate some flash drives that we had stored some stuff on to see what would happen to the flash drives under different levels of irradiation. As part of that, we took a school field trip to Penn State's campus. I had always wanted to go to a top engineering program, and I loved watching college football. And so it was love at first sight. I was sold on that first visit my junior year and became a Penn Stater 2 years later.
Awesome. Well, we're glad that you came here. I know there's some other great programs within driving distance of your home region. So very glad that you came here. So I don't always ask this question specific to Schreyer, but in your case, I did want to hear about it because you had some interesting thoughts. Can you tell us about your experience literally at the beginning at our orientation program, SHO Time?
Yeah, so SHO Time was really an amazing part of my experience at Penn State, and I have great memories of my time that week. I didn't know a soul when I arrived at Penn State. I kind of went because I liked the program, I liked college football, and I wanted to go to Penn State. And I came from a part of Virginia that didn't really send a lot of people to Penn State, Southern Virginia. That's changed over the years. Penn State now is a much bigger draw than it was back when I went. But in that first week, I really met some of my best friends at college. I mean, just great people in that Schreyer's SHO Time orientation that were friends of mine throughout college. And one of them was even a groomsman in my wedding. And I talked to him every few weeks. We still keep in touch. So you really can make friends for life in your first weeks at Penn State. And SHO Time was a big part of that.
Well, I'll be sure that Donna Meyer, our director of student programs, hears this part or sees this part of our episode because that'll mean a lot to her. SHO Time's been a big part for many a scholar. And I love hearing that, that stuck out to me that your groomsman, like one of your groomsmen was somebody you met at SHO Time. I think that really speaks to the community here.
Yeah, shout out to Kego Shimamura, who, if he's listening to this, he was a big part of that first week and lived together in New York after school. And then, he was a groomsman.
Well, he better once you send him the link when this is published. Now, you talked about you were drawn here in high school by the nuclear engineering program, obviously something that's one of those signature Penn State programs like meteorology and turf grass and some of the other things, obviously the ice cream short course too, and we'll get to that at the very end. But you ultimately settled on chemical engineering. So how did you decide, which engineering was the right one for you at the ripe old age of 19, 20 years old?
Yeah, look, I think it's fairly common in high school to have an idea of what an area of study or what a career might look like that is different than what it actually looks like when you get closer to it, right? I found at the time, and I still find nuclear engineering to be super, super fascinating. Very, very cool. Love the idea of nuclear reactors, nuclear fission. It's cool. It's cool stuff. When I took my first classes on that type of subject work, I did not find the coursework as interesting as I found the general concept, right? It just didn't, jive with me the same way that chemistry did. Took my first chemistry classes and chemistry just clicked for me. I just got it. I understood it. I was very good at it, and I liked it. I also had a good Schreyer friend, a guy named Taylor Mahar, give him a shout out, who was in chemical engineering. I had met him at SHO Time also, and he was a chemie, and he said, why don't you come over and take the chemie classes with me, sign up next semester. I think you'll like them. He twisted my arm just enough. I took some classes, and I said, this is awesome. This is what I want to do, and that's how I picked my major.
I mean, sometimes you just fall into them, right? Like your friend strong arms you says, hey, that's a good friend right there. Take this class. I think you're going to enjoy it. That's a very Schreyer thing, I think, right there.
when you take a hard major, and there's hard majors all across the university, but when you take a hard major, and chemical engineering was known as being a hard major, having someone that you're close with to take it with, that you know you're going to spend a lot of hours in the library, you're going to spend a lot of hours studying, working on problem sets. Having someone who's a close friend to do that with, I think, makes the experience more manageable and more fun. And that was part of it. Like, hey, I can do this with one of my best friends, and we can major together and get through it together.
That is a sound strategy. So if you're an early, first, second year scholar considering your majors, that's an important thing to think about. So I would take that advice from Reed here. Now, Reed, one of our major mission tenets and also a great way to find friends is creating opportunities for leadership and civic engagement, right? And a really common way for scholars to put this into practice is, of course, a Penn State signature thing, Dance Marathon or THON. So what is your connection to this incredible program and organization?
Yeah, THON was a big part of my college experience. So my first year, I actually wasn't really involved in THON. Again, I wasn't from Pennsylvania. I didn't know a ton of people when I got to Penn State. I didn't really have exposure to what it was before I got there. And so, you're drinking from a fire hose. I had heard about THON that first year, but I never really participated until THON weekend. And so I went that first year to THON weekend. And man, my mind is blown by that event. If you're considering Penn State and you haven't looked up videos of what THON weekend looks like, you should go online right after you listen to this, and you should look up what THON weekend's all about. I mean, it's an electric environment. You can't describe it in words. So after that, some friends of mine on freshman dorm were talking about how they'd love to found their own student organization, something that would combine THON with other philanthropic activities in State College. And the concept was like, THON is a wonderful thing to give back to, but also if you could give back in the non-THON season to local things in the State College community as volunteer hours or fundraisers or what have you, that would be a really good way to have year-round participation outside of just THON season. So I think there were 8 to 10 of us in that first exec team meeting where we brainstormed the type of organization we might want to create. And it led to Boulevard, PSU, which is a student organization that we helped found, had nearly 100 members and would raise tens of thousands of dollars a year by the time we graduated. And I even got to dance in THON later on in college. And that was just one of the coolest things, I think, to date that I've ever done in my life.
Well, I'm sure one of the things that you saw from the floor at the BJC was the big BLVD letters blinking up in the stands. That one always kind of sticks out to me. I had no issue like going, oh, I know that one when I saw your questionnaire answers. So tell us about both running that group and founding it and also dancing. How did that impact your career? What lessons did you take from running a small group like that on campus to the different roles that you've held out in the professional world?
Yeah, before I jump into that question, the BLVD lights, I was there when those lights were brainstormed and came up with. The battery technology has changed a lot since the first year we did that. I think the first year we did that, we went through like several dozen D batteries to power that thing. Now everyone's got their lithium ion rechargeable things. It's probably a lot more higher tech than it was, but I remember saying there's no way that sign is going to stay lit all weekend. They're like, yeah, we just got to bring enough batteries. We'll keep it lit.
That's also a great description of THON weekend in its own way. So apropos.
Yeah. So, look, leading and organizing teams to accomplish something together, right, is something that I think helps you in any part of your career. It's funny though, like in college, you are in charge of things because you're an upperclassman. You're one of the more senior people in your college. You founded organizations. You're bringing people together to achieve things. And you go from this position of leadership and influence to the lowest rung on the corporate ladder where you're barely trusted to make coffee for a meeting, right? I mean, you're junior. And so it's a humbling experience to go from that position in a college organization out into the real world. But I think if you work hard and you're willing to learn everything that you can, you'll earn more responsibility over time. And then before you know it, you're being asked to take charge of things, right? You're leading people again, even if it's in an unofficial capacity at first, then it becomes an official capacity. And then at some point you you take a step back and you say, wait, like this isn't that different than the concepts of leading things when I led them in college or I led them in high school or what have you. The technical details are more complicated, right? The project scopes are much, much larger than what you're doing in school. But people are still people. And learning how to motivate people to get something done is one of the harder parts of leading. And I think the experiences that you form with something like being in charge of a student group at Penn State and founding Boulevard can translate directly to the workforce as you get more senior and you have to take on a leadership role.
Excellent. And so obviously that's a big service component with Boulevard, but you also shared with me that you were involved in the ski club. So I have to ask, how does a club like that work? Obviously there is Tussey Mountain down in Boalsburg, but it's skiing. So there's even in State College, we get a lot of snow, but it's not an all year round opportunity. So how does a club like that work?
Well, of course, you have less things in the summer to do than you do in the winter. You're on a student budget, so we weren't jetting off to the mountains of New Zealand, right, in the summertime. But we did have year-round social events. So we would meet up to watch a new ski movie that might come out, or we might meet downtown on the weekend and go watch a Penn State sports game. During the ski season, though, was when the most activity happened, right? So from about winter break in December through spring break, there was a lot more activity and things planned. So the officers would basically organize these big ski trips, right? And on these ski trips, they would charter buses for us. They would book hotel rooms, buy bulk lift tickets, and they'd say to be involved in this trip, it's, I don't know, X amount of money for the weekend, and everything's paid for except your food, right? I'm sure the prices are higher now than when I was in college skiing. Everything's become more expensive, but skiing in particular has become more expensive in the last several years. Then we would all pile onto buses and we'd go to a long weekend in Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire, even Quebec. And then spring break every year was a big out west trip. So my senior year, we did Jackson Hole in Wyoming, which was to date still one of the best ski trips I've ever done in my life because I'm surrounded with all of my friends that I've gotten to know over 4 years of college. We're out in Jackson Hole. We had incredible conditions. And so it really is a great way to share a hobby with a lot of your friends that you enjoy doing. And there's versions of clubs like that at Penn State beyond just skiing, but it's a good way to get your service side, but also you can have your recreational side of clubs.
Absolutely. I've heard great advice to get involved in something related to your career, your major, get involved in something service, and get involved in just something for fun. So I think you're a good model of that, Reed. Now, I'm sure skiing was a really good respite from the rigors of being a Chem E major, but it's time. Let's talk about thesis. So tell us what you researched and how you've used that in your career, both early when you were a chemical engineer and in the roles since that we will dive into very shortly here.
Yeah, certainly. So I did my thesis under Dr. Wayne Curtis in the chemical engineering department. He was also my honors advisor. His lab focused on the intersection of chemical engineering and biology. This is often referred to as biotechnology, and it's been a rapidly growing industry over the last 20 or 30 years as science has advanced. So the idea in biotechnology is that you hijack biological processes to make something that you cannot make in normal chemistry, right? For example, you can't make a protein by mixing chemical A and chemical B together in a test tube and heating it, right? You need cells to make a protein. So if you need to make a specific protein, you have to hijack cells to make them make you that specific protein, for example. So it sounds like science fiction, but it is very real and it is very cool. And there's a whole industry around doing this and there's a lot of research that goes on. So I'll give an example from what I did in my thesis. So certain bacteria can eat carbon monoxide gas and nitrogen out of the liquid that they're living in, and they can survive off of those two inputs, and they can produce ethanol as a waste product, right? So wouldn't it be great if you could grow this at enough scale that you could make enough ethanol to make biofuel, right? Because carbon monoxide is an industrial waste product. It's a greenhouse gas, right? It's very harmful to be floating around out there. What if you could capture that carbon monoxide, feed it to something, and turn it into something that you can use as a renewable fuel, like ethanol? So we would work with these small bioreactors, and they had to be small because carbon monoxide super, super toxic. So you don't want a big volume of this floating around in a lab environment, because if you have a leak, that's very, very bad. So you need tiny reactors that you can run with carbon monoxide to minimize your risk of leakage. And then you need to have several of them so you can test different strains of bacteria to see which ones produce the most ethanol in the shortest amount of time, right? It's an efficiency equation for whether or not you can do this. So I worked with Dr. Curtis and some PhD advisors on this that were part of the project to basically figure out a way to design this bioreactor and test it to see if we could make enough ethanol from this bacteria to be meaningful.
Well, that is a pretty cool topic, and obviously a lot of real world applicability. So hopefully it was continued work, because that sounds like maybe it could lead to something that would be really helpful for us as citizens and for anybody who can monetize that.
Yeah, exactly. And I ended up my first job, and we'll get to my first job, I'm sure, later here. But in my first job, I worked on bioreactor optimization for a pharma company. So it ended up being super related to what I did post college. More broadly, I think the thesis, even if you end up majoring in something that you never do professionally, and I'm a good example of a pivot there, I think learning how to tackle very big projects by chunking them into smaller pieces is useful no matter what you're doing in your career. And the thesis is a great example of that. It's this big abstract thing you're assigned in the honors college of like, hey, you're going to write a thesis before you graduate. And like, you got to like break it down into steps and be like, okay, like, what is my thesis going to be on? Like, who's my advisor going to be? All right. Then like, how am I going to approach it? I got to break it into chunks. Like, I'm going to do this step of the research first, and it's reading a bunch of stuff. And then I'm going to do this step, which might be an experiment or a research project or whatever. Anyways, you're taking this abstract big thing, chunking it down to something more manageable. And I think that's the basics of project management that's super useful in the real world.
I could not agree more with everything you just said there, Reed. I really can't. Now, in terms of project management, like obviously I've done many of these, and I'm most proud of this question because I personally think it's really clever. I'm going to put my New Balance on. This is a real dad joke in the making. Now, if I read your questionnaire answers carefully here, Reed, your thesis results weren't the only thing you found at Penn State during your senior year. Is that correct?
That's correct, Sean. I did find something else my senior year. And yes, that was a very cleverly worded question. It made me smile when I read it on the pre-read for this. I met this beautiful, incredible girl my senior year, actually on a ski trip weekend to Sugarloaf, Maine. It was January of our senior year. She had lost her phone earlier that week. So I never really had a reason to ask her for her phone number. It would have been kind of weird to be like, hey, can I have your number to text you when you don't have a phone? So I had to DM her on Facebook after the trip, which, it dates me a little bit. It was before Instagram days, before TikTok days. And I asked her out on a date over a Facebook DM. Did end up getting her number. Fast forward to today. We've been married for 5 years. And our future kids, I think, by default, will be Nittany Lion fans from the get-go, with both parents being alumni. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, I love that. That is a really great story, kind of merging all the different pieces here so far. And there's a nice photo, it looks like, of the two of you on the bookshelf behind you. So
there is. That is our wedding. And there's also a Rose Bowl picture. My wife did not make that trip, but my brother's a Penn State alum. And it's my brother and my dad and I at the Rose Bowl, and my wife and I getting married in the background. So.
Which Rose Bowl?
That was the USC one, unfortunately, that we lost in a heartbreaker, but an incredible game.
It was.
And then
it was right until the last minute there. I was there as well.
That was tough. That was tough. And then I went again to see Utah and see that win. So my brother and I went. That was, I think, 2 years ago, right?
Yep.
And that was fun. I had to see them win a Rose Bowl before I could stop going. So.
I think the trick is just not play USC. It seems to be the luck we have. But hey, now they're joining the big.
Unfortunately, they're joining the big. So we're gonna
like geography, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about your time at Penn State. We've reminisced a little bit about football and some big wins and some almost big wins. But it's time to talk careers. So we're going to talk on stage one here about your engineering roles. So how did you go about your search for job number one and also any internships that preceded it? And what did you find effective that could be helpful for today's scholars in their processes?
Yeah, certainly happy to talk about this. So I took kind of a non-traditional approach to my summers in college. A lot of my classmates, starting maybe between freshman and sophomore year, they might do a local internship with some company, close to their home. And then sophomore to junior year would do, a big boy internship with one of the big companies through the career fair. I spent all of my summers working at a summer camp in North Carolina as a camp counselor. It's called Camp Seagull. And I had a great time doing that. For me, it was an incredible experience, a different set of valuable experiences compared to what a lot of my traditional classmates did. But I did want to go into biotech, and I wanted to be an engineer in biotech. And that's kind of tough to break into without internship experience or without a graduate degree, like a master's or a PhD. A lot of the undergrad hires, they want you to have done an internship in that area. And so I found a part-time internship my senior year with a startup in State College. That was a small biotech manufacturing startup. And I would do that around my class schedule my senior year to kind of get some internship experience on my resume, since I was, I had my thesis, which was really strong and in the right area. But then I had the summer camp thing that, while valuable, is not exactly what a hiring manager for a research lab is looking for on your resume. And so I was able to leverage that part-time internship my senior year, in addition to my thesis, to an entry-level role with a biotech pharma company called Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. And I saw the job posting. They're a Northeastern company. They're in New York. They ended up having a lot of Penn State alumni that worked there. I had met one of the hiring managers in that department at a job fair, although I didn't end up getting hired into his team. I got hired into one of his colleagues' team. But I had met him. Nothing was open with him at the time, but then something opened up later. I applied for it and went through the process and ended up moving to New York.
So, Reed, what did you like and what did you not like about an entry-level engineering role? I think it's good to help prepare students for that bench work and other things to get a realistic expectation of, like, you're not going to be solving this major problem on day one, right? Like, you build towards something.
You do. I mean, you're a cog in a machine right out of college. But if you're willing to learn, it can be a very, very fulfilling experience for you. And if you take a step back and appreciate what the machine you're working as a part of does, it can be super, super cool. So my first job, I thought, was the coolest job in the world. And I still think it's one of the coolest things that happens in the world. I'm going to go back to nerding out about biotech for a little while. We would produce truly fully human antibodies for a variety of different treatments, right? So macular degeneration to cancer to Ebola response. The company I worked for then later made a COVID medicine that was after I had left, but all sorts of different things. And what I mean by a truly fully human antibody is these antibodies were chemically identical to the antibodies that your body produces naturally. And this is important for drugs that are antibodies, because the immune system needs to see these as good guys, right? If it sees it as a bad guy, your immune system will flare up and attack it. So you have to create these like incognito antibodies that are manufactured, but the body thinks they are real, right? That's not even the coolest part, though. The coolest part was we did this with genetically engineered Chinese hamster ovary cells, right? And so you do this, and you put in snippets of human DNA that are the snippets that make antibodies, and you hijack the hamster ovary cells with snippets of human DNA, so they are producing a protein that is a human protein, even though it's not a human cell. All right. So you do this because you need mammalian cells, and because you need mammalian cells that can be spun around in a bioreactor at high speed. It just so happens that Chinese hamster ovary cells, for whatever weird reason, and I don't know who figured this out, are particularly good at being spun around and not getting damaged. So that's why we use them. And then you hijack them and you make human antibodies with them. So super science fiction stuff. Didn't even know this stuff existed when I was in high school deciding where to go for college. But you get into research, you learn about something that you didn't know about. You're like, wow, this is super cool. I want to work on this. So my specific role, my cog in the machine, was I would optimize the bioreactor where we made the antibodies. So be 60 of these small reactors, and I would test different conditions across the 60 reactors. And I would do everything from design the experiment to sample those bioreactors. If those samples needed to be taken at 2 a.m., I'd be there at 2 a.m., right? If they needed to be done at 6 a.m., I'd be there at 6 a.m. It wasn't every day that I was there at weird hours, but there were some weird hours. And it was everything from the manual sampling to the writing down the results to analyzing the results and presenting them. Then a different group after us would figure out how to purify, because a bioreactor has a lot of junk in it. It's got a lot of cells and byproducts, and part of that junk is this specific set of antibodies that we've been spending so much time making that are going to be the treatment. Well, you can't inject all the junk into the cancer patient. You have to strip out all the junk and have just the pure antibody left over that then becomes your drug. So a different group would then develop that, the purification step. So once the two groups would figure out how to do it safely, and most importantly, repeatably safely, we would then teach the manufacturing department how to do it. So we just had one step. It was figure out how the bioreactor works, figure out how to optimize it, hand it over to purification. Then as a group, we would hand it over to manufacturing. And then manufacturing is where they actually made the drug. It's a whole different facility, different part of the country, different department in the company entirely. I really enjoyed the work that we were doing. I thought it was super cool. I still think it's super cool. But once I had learned that toolkit, the actual process of optimizing it was a little bit repetitive for me. There were flavors of difference, and there were cooler projects that I could have graduated up into. But it wasn't as interesting to me as some of the other opportunities that I saw out there in the workforce. So I got a little bit restless kind of doing the rinse and repeat of this one cog in the machine. But I learned a lot of great skills, and I had a lot of fun doing it. But for me, it wasn't the right long-term fit for my career.
So you're kind of getting a little restless there. How did you decide, of all things, hey, I'm going to just kind of stop out, and instead of changing jobs, I'm going to go pursue an MBA? What was that thought process, and how did you decide, when and where to go?
Yeah, no, a great question. So as I was kind of in the R&D world doing lab work, I became more and more interested in like the investment and business side of the industry. So I wanted to know how these companies go from an initial startup that gets funding to grow into a mature company, what those kind of checkpoints are along the way to becoming a more mature company, and then how you able to fund the R&D machine that requires these businesses to keep growing. I was more interested in like the financial side of how the industry was working than I was in the lab work. And I knew people from my general network, alumni that I had met or friends of friends or whoever, that had kind of put the idea in my head that like to a hiring manager, you're a generally very smart person in Schreyer's and Penn State and good GPA and all of that. But your resume is a lot of lab work. Hard pivot from lab work to the broader business world, while not impossible, is going to be a lot easier if you get an MBA. And then you'll kind of have that stamp of he can learn more than just the science stuff. He can kind of have this broader exposure. So I had strong GPA. I had Schreyer on my resume. I knew I could get into a top tier school as long as my GMAT score was good enough. So I studied for that. I ended up getting a great score there. Decided to apply. Applied to a few schools. I ended up going to Harvard for business school, which was my top choice. I was drawn in particular by their focus on what's called the case method. And the case method is a style of teaching, and there are probably Penn State professors that do this, but it wouldn't be as common in engineering. And it's a style of teaching that is more conversational based. It's more Socratic method than lecture, right? Doesn't lend itself to very technical, like math-heavy topics that require a lot of lecture on the board, but does lend itself really well to things like business strategy, which is a large part of what an MBA teaches you. So I was drawn to that. I thought the experience gave me a great foundation, and was very happy with where I ended up.
Reed, I really love how nonchalantly you're just like, I ended up going to Harvard. Only one of the best business schools you could go to for an MBA, so no big deal.
It's funny, like there are people who go to Ivy League schools and wear it like a badge of honor, but I always felt like I was a state school kid that was like slightly out of place in the Ivy League. I was like, no, don't put that on me. I'm a Penn Stater. I'm just here for business school. Like I'm not a Harvard guy. I'm a Penn State guy.
It's like Elle Woods. You got into Harvard Law? What? Like it's hard? So I did my MBA here at Penn State. You did yours at Harvard. So I'm curious. I came from liberal arts. You came from engineering. What advice do you have for scholars, especially for those who are not in our incredible Smeal College of Business, about applying for an MBA, or just generally for scholars who are applying for a graduate program in discipline B after they majored in undergrad A?
No, it's a great question. I'd say don't shy away from applying just because you didn't study the same topic in undergraduate. This might be a controversial take, but it's something that I've feel somewhat strongly about, in that I don't think the true power of an undergraduate degree is what you learn, but learning how to learn something without the high school structure of parents and mandatory attendance. Like no one in college is going to force you to go to class. Your professors aren't going to come hunt you down or write you up to your parents. They're going to be like, oh, that guy just didn't show up. No one's going to force you to do the homework. So it's not what you decide to study. It's that you were able to put your head down and learn something on your own. I think as long as you're challenging yourself and you're keeping your grades up, you're showing that you're capable of learning, and knowing how to learn stuff is what's really important for graduate school, for career, for whatever. And I think the graduate schools know that. There's obviously exceptions like this, right? Like you're not going to get into med school if you never took a science class ever. If you were creative writing all the way through and then you're like, I want to go be a doctor. Like that's not going to work. But I do think generally it holds true that learning how to learn is more important than what you learn.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Reed, because you can be a creative writing major, but you definitely need the science too. And I think those skill sets would probably be a really good combination for medicine. But yeah, there are some instances where, especially in the STEM side, where you do need some like hard engineering, understanding the chemistry involved.
And I think to your point, the breadth of experience adds value. And I think a lot of graduate schools and hiring managers know this, right? Like a patent lawyer, for example, is going to need to understand STEM and law, right? A hospital administrator is going to need to know medicine and business, right? You've got to combine two different seemingly unrelated things into one for a lot of different jobs that are out there. And so they know that there's value in expertise in multiple topics. I think they also know, and we chatted about this a little bit earlier, my nuclear engineering goal when I was 17 or 18, like I think a lot of graduate schools understand that when you pick something at 19, 20 years old, that people might realize later in life that they don't want to do exactly what they thought they wanted to, right? So they're used to this idea of people pivoting. I think as long as you have a compelling reason or a story for why you want to do what you want to do and why you want to go pursue this in graduate school, or you want to make this pivot, I don't think there's any reason a school would reject you just because you didn't study the exact same thing that you might want to get a master's or a PhD in.
Yeah, there's definitely a level of demonstrating that you can learn new things. And I think that's a hallmark of a Schreyer Scholar, is kind of continually reinventing yourself. And you're not the first guest I've had that says a huge part of college is learning to learn, learning how to learn. And speaking of those pivots, so, after B school, as they say, you pivoted into consulting. And it's really a popular choice, especially right out of undergrad for a lot of our Schreyer Scholars. So how did you make that switch into that after having been in those technical bench roles before Harvard?
Well, this is an easy one. The MBA opened the doors, and consulting I viewed as MBA 2.0. What I mean by that is I found it to be the highest ROI on my time post-MBA in terms of learning how the business world works and getting exposure to a large breadth of business problems. So I worked at BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and I primarily focused on what's called private equity due diligence. And this within consulting, I viewed to be the highest ROI type of project I could do. So these are 2 to 4 week sprints that you do where you research some specific question that a private equity investment group is looking to answer related to an investment that they might want to make. So these questions might be, how big is the market? How much market share does each of the major players have? How do the customers view those major players in relative strengths and weaknesses, right? How quickly is the market growing? What can this company do to differentiate itself relative to its competitors over the next 5 years? And we would answer these research questions for them. And I got exposure to a very, very broad set of companies, everything from chemical manufacturers to healthcare companies to veterinary clinics to car washes, which we'll get to car washes later, and all sorts of different industries in a short period of time, and how they work and how to think about the strategy and the finance of these industries. It was super cool. I also did some manufacturing, like optimization type projects. I did some healthcare strategy projects that both of those kind of harkened back to my pharmaceutical engineering days, but combined those skills with an MBA. And so I picked consulting because I thought it was the best way to learn and build the base on what I had already done in the classroom of MBA, and then figure out where I wanted to go, as a career choice post consulting. It's very common for a lot of people who start in consulting to not finish in consulting. And there's nothing wrong with that in that industry. The whole industry is set up that way for people to come in, learn, and at some point, if you don't want to stay in consulting, pivot, they call it exit to industry at some point.
Yeah, there's kind of that adage of like you either move up or move out in a lot of the big firms, right? Yeah. So, you moved out, and we'll get to that in a second, but what lessons did you learn or advice do you have for scholars who at some point in their career maybe even have just a passing interest in being a consultant at some point along the line, or, just stick in the back of their head, or if that's like their gung-ho, they want to do that very first thing?
Yeah, I'd say if you're interested in it, go to the career fair events, reach out to alumni that you either know through friends of friends or you cold outreach that have done consulting, and ask them, hey, what's it like?
After you've finished engaging with this episode.
And I'm always happy to have that conversation. And what they'll do is they'll teach you, one, what it's like, right? They can give you a quick 15, 20 minutes of what it's actually like to do the job, which is always helpful insight. And two, they can explain how the recruiting process works. Consulting has a very rigid and structured recruiting process, and there are rules to how to recruit for consulting. And if you don't just randomly apply online and expect that to get you your foot in the door in consulting. It's you go to career fairs and you meet people at career fairs, and then you learn how to do case method interviews. And the case method interview is a specific type of interview that consulting firms like to give. The consulting people, the alumni, the people at the career events, they will explain this to you. They're not mean people. They will explain how it works. They'll give you resources on how to prepare for the interviews. Consulting clubs on campus can help you learn this as well. And if you want to get into it, learn how the hiring process works. Put your head down, prepare for the interviews. And if you're smart, Schreyer's kid with a good GPA, you'll get your foot in the door and you'll get an experience doing it.
So you did make a pivot. You got out of consulting and you got into manufacturing. So you've used that word a couple of times, but how did you end up picking that? What was the impetus there? Walk us through your mindset.
Yeah, so I was an early employee in a human-grade pet food startup called Spot and Tango, which makes dog food using the same quality of raw ingredients as the stuff that you would find in your grocery store. Like if we said we had blueberries in a recipe, they were real blueberries. If we said we had chicken, it was not the waste product of chicken that is typically in pet food that's unfit for human consumption. It was the ground chicken that you might find in a chicken nugget in the frozen aisle, right? And so I was one of the first employees there. I think I was employee 15 or something. And I got there because a random headhunter, like a recruiter, called me and said she had a client looking for someone to help build their first in-house manufacturing plant. To date, Spot and Tango had only done outsourced manufacturing, and they wanted to bring it in-house, and they wanted to do the manufacturing themselves. I said directly in the interview, you do realize I've never built a manufacturing plant before. And they said, no, we get that. We have some investors who will advise it, but we also have never built a manufacturing plant, and we don't have any manufacturing experience. But you have worked as an engineer, you've worked in plants, you've consulted in plants, and you seem like a generally intelligent person. Can you come help us figure out how to do this? We can't pay you very much because we're a startup, but we can give you some stock. and it'll be fun. And
sorry, this is great. Like, I wish more job interviews and things were like this. Continue, please.
So I said, this seems like it's way over my head, but this seems really, really cool and fun and impactful. Like, I think I could really, I know enough about how manufacturing plants should run from having worked in them as an engineer and having consulted on making them run better as a consultant. I was like, I think I do know what good looks like. And I think I could help design the systems and the people and processes, even if I've never set up a freeze dryer for freeze-dried dog food, or I've never managed a construction project. I was surrounding myself with advisors there because I'm senior enough that I could help do that, where I had somebody help me with construction. I had somebody help me with the setup of the actual freeze dryer. And then the concepts were just engineering and manufacturing concepts the same way that I knew how to do them. And so we stood up this plant. I hired a plant manager. We hired a maintenance manager, a production manager, a quality manager. We hired like 70 hourly employees, and the hourly employees had supervisors and they had roles. There was a warehouse team. There was a quality team. There was the freeze dry room team and the packaging room team. And, with the management team of the plant, we sat down and we designed what the processes would look like. And we kind of started with a blank sheet of paper and said, it flows from this room. It's this many units per hour to this room at this many units per hour. And we're going to do these quality checks. And, it was all human grade food. And I had been involved in the entire design of how the plant works. And so on every plant tour we'd give to investors or politicians or whoever, I'd take a piece of the dog food off the line and I would eat it. And say, look, it's human grade and I'm willing to stand behind it. I will eat it off the line.
Did you get any of your investors, or even better, a politician, to ever also try it?
Oh, I did. The politicians never did it on camera, but I did get some of the investors to try it. And it's the same thing. It's like, put your money where your mouth is. If it's
Literally
human grade food, you should be willing to stand behind this. And we were willing to. Dogs, I'll point out, do not have the same palate as humans. They don't lose salt in their sweat the way we do, so they don't eat as much salt in their food. So all dog food is super, super bland. And so you eat this and you're like, this is very dry. This tastes vaguely like chicken. And wow, this could use some salt. But dogs don't eat it. So it's made for them, not for us.
And yet there's always just only one thing that they won't seem to eat off the floor at your house. That's they don't like a banana, but they'll eat everything else. Or they don't like carrots, but they'll eat everything else. So in case you were wondering,
it's raw spinach for my dogs. They don't eat anything raw lettuce. They won't eat off the floor.
It's funny you mentioned blueberries. My dog, I think that's one of the things she turns her nose up. She's picky. I don't know. Reed and I are both dog people, so we could go on all day about dog food. But I think kind of on the manufacturing side, going back to the core of this before this goes too much off the rails, which obviously would be bad in a manufacturing plant, that's kind of cool that you were able to do that from scratch. So did you just use your intuition and research? Did you tour other factories? Because you're not retrofitting and trying to improve an existing process. You're designing it from the ground up, which is probably both really a cool opportunity and also a little bit terrifying, I imagine.
Yeah, I think when you get in a leadership position like that, the most important thing you can do is say from the get-go, I don't know all the answers, and that is okay. And know when to ask for help, know when to admit you don't know something, and then know how generally to find answers. You don't have to know exactly how to find answers. This gets back to the benefit of a thesis, right? Know to yourself, well, I don't know this. Is this something I can read about myself online? Yes, no, maybe. Is this something I know somebody who knows the answer to this? Or I know somebody who knows the answer to this? Is this something I can pay somebody to explain to me, right? And if you have that menu of ways to figure something out, certainly it suddenly becomes something that you can break down and you can solve. So we had contract manufacturers that we would have continuing relationships with. Even if we insourced a part of our manufacturing, we would still need to outsource some. Go to their plants, tour them. How do they do things? Take notes. I think this is a great idea. I'm going to copy that. I think that's a horrible idea, and I'm going to make sure we never do that in our plant because that looks super dangerous or super sketchy, right? Having investors that have worked in similar industries and therefore bring expertise to the table. Hiring employees that know how to do things you don't know how to do. I hired a wonderful head of quality who she knew all of these FDA rules that were so detailed and so technical that she built up over her career that I was never going to have that depth of expertise. But I didn't need to have it because I could go hire somebody who brought that to the table, and then you listen to them and you trust them to do what you hired them to do. So you have to fit the pieces of expertise together to tackle a project like this and admit that you don't know all the answers, and that's okay.
And there's definitely a little bit of having some humility there, leaving your ego at the door to be able to admit that, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that in general, look, you see people at the top of corporate ladders that are egomaniacs, but I think nowadays you see a shift in the most successful companies to people that are willing to leave their ego at the door and be collaborative to solve problems versus that kind of top-down World War II general approach of leadership. And we could get a whole derailed conversation on leadership philosophy, but I think being able to be humble in the workplace and collaborative in the workplace has shown to be a higher probability of success for teams than the alternative approach.
Definitely. We'll leave that to our friends and colleagues over in student affairs, the Smeal College of Business, and some other areas, but there's great leadership resources on campus. I do want to bring us up to the present day in your career, Reed. And because this is a Friday afternoon when we're recording, you're in the world of working at the car wash. Yeah, right. And also in private equity. That doesn't really fit in the tune of the song. But I'll admit, kind of to your last point, my knowledge of car washes begins and ends with I've used them, and mostly when I just don't want to wash my car at home. So can you explain both the industry and your story in it for scholars and even our Scholar alumni listening or viewing? Because I think this is really cool and really fascinating how you found a niche market to get into here.
Certainly. First, how excited have you been to sing the car wash song on that question all day?
Well, I wrote it in the questions on Monday. Today's Friday, and I'm very caffeinated to get through the rest of today. So I don't know whatever time of day you're watching this, but this was a Friday afternoon, and I'm on like 4 cups of coffee. So I'll let you infer things.
No judgment here. I've had several cups of coffee today myself. All right. So car washing seems like a random pivot. It is kind of a random pivot. There's a little bit of backstory here, so just bear with me for a minute or two. In business school, there are classes now on something called entrepreneurship through acquisition. This is an idea that you can raise money from banks, Small Business Administration in particular, and investors to buy a small business to run yourself. And you can keep majority ownership if you structure it the right way. It's become a fairly popular post-graduation option for many MBAs of top MBA programs as something that you can go do. Typically, I'm not buying a software company that's super sexy, that's VC funded. You're buying something that's sleepier. It's a plumbing company, it's a woodworking company, it's a car wash, something that people wouldn't think of, that's my dream to run. But the economics of it, if you actually look under the hood, they're quite nice. A lot of these small businesses have very attractive economics. They're just small businesses, so no one thinks to buy them. So me and some business school friends had always talked about doing this. We started looking around, and we found this company called Eagle Woodworking in Massachusetts that makes custom dovetail drawers. Then we found Soapy's Car Wash, which is the car wash that I owned in Connecticut. Then we found Southern Fence, which is a fencing company outside of Charleston. And one person would run it, and the other ones we would co-invest in each other's deals. Even though one person was running it, we would all be investors and support each other in each other's deals. We still do this, by the way. We still find these post-MBA entrepreneurs that want to go buy small businesses. We no longer run them because we've got our own or we're tapped out doing our own thing, but we will still invest in them and advise them. And it's a really cool thing to take someone young in their career and help them grow and live their dream of owning their own small business. And they're the kind of master of their own destiny once they're in there. So why car washes? When I was at BCG doing all that research for these private equity firms, we started seeing a lot of car washes come through as research projects, like a lot of car wash companies. And they were car wash chemical companies or car wash software companies or car wash equipment companies or the car washes themselves. And all these investors were asking all these questions about car washes. They're like, this is interesting. And we'd build these maps for them occasionally of like where there was investment activity in car wash. And there was always this empty space in the Northeast. There's a lot of like systemic reasons that investors were not as excited about the Northeast at the time as they were about the rest of the country. But Northeast, primarily, it's harder to get things permitted. Labor's more expensive. Land is more expensive. It's just harder to make the math work. But we kind of knew that the Northeast would happen eventually. And so we had this idea of like, what if we front run the trend? What if we just go buy car washes in the Northeast, put a few of these together? No one's really investing in them up here, so they're cheaper. And then the big investors will show up. The private equity money will show up, and the car washes will become more expensive, right? And then we'll benefit from that, and we'll sell it for more than we bought it for. So that was kind of the plan. The thesis was correct. The investors showed up. Our timing was off. They showed up like within 2 years of us buying this thing. And a big investment group out of New York that I was familiar with from my time at BCG had actually just bought a big car wash company in the Northeast with plans to grow by buying a bunch of smaller 1, 2, 3 store operators in the Northeast in particular. The company the investment firm created to do this was called Summit Wash Holdings. So Summit Wash Holdings bought my car wash and put it into their platform of car washes. And then they hired me to lead mergers and acquisitions for them, as well as corporate strategy. And so I now buy more car washes for Summit Wash Holdings. That's kind of how I landed where I am now.
So you start off with bacteria eating CO, and now you're merging car wash businesses. So obviously there's the MBA, but beyond the MBA at Harvard, how did you start learning all the skills that you needed to do the market analysis, the finance, and answer all these questions, find those opportunities, those inefficiencies in the market, if you will? Because in my brain, I'm like, the Northeast, road salt. This would be a smart place for car washes. I can't believe people overlooked that, right? So walk us through your continuing education post Penn State, post Harvard.
Yeah, I think two things: great mentors and seeking out great mentors, and then intellectual curiosity. I think there's this idea that asking questions about why things work or how things work is like a childish behavior. And I think it gets stomped out of some people over the course of their life. You're just told, oh, it works because that's the way it works, right? Don't ask questions, right? Don't annoy me. I think that's silly. I found people and bosses that would always humor my constant questions. Why? Why do we do it that way? How does it work? Why is it that way? And nurturing that intellectual curiosity, there's a balance, obviously, but someone who can nurture that intellectual curiosity and answer those questions can help broaden your understanding of how the world works and can lead you into applying what is ultimately the ability to learn and critical thinking and project management to whatever industry or whatever problem if you've got the right foundation set. So, for example, I might want to understand, well, why are we doing a drug in this market? What's the reason that we're doing this drug versus this other drug? A manager can say, because that's what the marketing team says the market opportunity is, or that's what the medical team says, and shut you down. Or they can say, that's a great question. Here's how you would find that answer. Here's the path to getting your curiosity satisfied. There's two different ways that you can go. In one case, the employee's shut down, demotivated. Oh, I've asked a dumb question. In the other case, the employee's excited. They understand the big picture. They're motivated, right? So finding mentors that can help guide you, and I found mentors that guided me throughout the way, is what helps you learn skills outside of the specific thing that you're being asked to do. Now, they won't necessarily give you paid time to fully go learn something new outside of what your job responsibility is. But if they give you a little teaser, you can learn a lot on the internet or through networking with people about how things work. So I always wanted to know more about how finance worked. It goes back to my talking about being interested in investment when I was an engineer in pharma. When I went to business school, I took a lot of finance classes. And then post business school, I kept taking on topics and taking on assignments and asking for things that gave me exposure to what I wanted to learn more about. Because I had the critical thinking, I had the project management. I didn't know this one language of finance, market research, market analysis, but by immersing myself in projects that would give me exposure to that, I started to gain those skills, and I could augment it with research on my own until the point that I was comfortable in a room talking about complicated finance or market strategy topics.
Awesome. Yeah, I will admit, in my MBA program, that was one of those classes that I just got through. That was not the ones that really like stoked my imagination. So kudos to you, Reed. And in that,
hey, to each their own. To each their own, Sean.
I was all about the strategy and the leadership classes. Like that was more my jam. Now, to your point about asking questions, intellectual curiosity, one thing that this is probably a really silly question. I even wrote that in my question, but is the transition as we slowly move to EVs from combustion engine vehicles, does that have any impact on your industry, or is that kind of a moot point for you?
It's kind of a moot point, but there's a trend behind your question that I think, or related to your question that I'll touch on. So EVs now have something called car wash mode, which just is the equivalent of putting them in neutral, like a normal car. They're all like, the car wash should not get water anywhere that rain or driving over a puddle wouldn't normally get it. So cars are built to handle the level of water that a car wash puts on them. It's not like it's putting it anywhere that would be dangerous for the electricity. So people take pride in their vehicles and they want to keep them clean. We don't discriminate based on type of engine, right? There is a trend, though, of miles driven per unit of time going down in the United States. And that does hurt car washing slightly, but it's offset by a general trend of people wanting to keep their car cleaner, like more frequent cleans per mile driven. Miles driven is basically, if you don't leave the garage for 5 days because you work from home 5 days a week instead of going into the office 5 days a week, your car might not get as dirty, right? And so that has softened a little bit. But again, the offset is people now, like car wash memberships are a thing. People are showing up to their kids' soccer practice with cleaner cars than they were when I was growing up, where everyone's cars were filthy all the time. Like the societal expectation is like a cleaner car than it used to be. And so that trend is actually far offsetting the miles driven decrease. But it's interesting to figure out what drives different industries' revenues like that.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Like you see a lot of the discussions around work from home and how it's impacting, say, corporate real estate or those ancillary businesses like the coffee shops and the delis in those major metropolitan areas, right? But I didn't think of like, car washes, right? Like that you're not driving your car as much, won't be as dirty.
Yeah, car washes, oil changes, tire change places, general auto body or automotive aftermarket is the general industry. And yeah, if miles driven, a lot of those feel a little bit of softness from that.
So I didn't write this question in here, but as I'm thinking about this, I'm curious, the things that you see pop up elsewhere here on YouTube, if you're watching the video version, there's like people who have channels with hundreds of thousands of subscribers that like clean carpets and cars and stuff in ASMR. How do you feel about that as somebody who's in this industry? Like, are you like, this is really cool and helping dispel myths, or what is your reaction to those kind of things?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the exact content of the video. I think in general, people taking pride in seeing something go from dirty to clean, I think is a common human emotion on seeing something, right? Like something is dirty, I took the time, it is clean, you can see the actual fruit of the labor happen. I think it's a powerful response people have to that type of content. If people are saying that, a tunnel or automatic car wash is, inferior to a hand wash, well, my response would be that depends on a lot of variables, right?
Yeah, whether that person has a toddler or not who's trying to help out.
Your toddler drops the sponge on the driveway, picks it back up, and then wipes the rocky sponge on the paint job.
I did that as a child. I'm guilty.
Or if the car wash that you go to has an operator that doesn't maintain their equipment, the equipment can damage your car. But if you go to a good car wash operator, you're going to get a good car wash. If you go to a good detailer or you do a good detail yourself, you're going to get a good car wash. The quality of the service provider doing the work is far more important than the type of car wash. I don't think there's necessarily a benefit of automatic tunnel car wash over washing in your driveway. I do think washing at a tunnel car wash uses less water. There's a lot of data behind that, so it's slightly better for the environment than doing your driveway. But the quality of the car wash is going to be the same as long as you take care of it. And I think people posting about cleaning on YouTube, it's good. People see a video like that and they say, oh, my car needs a car wash. I don't want to do it myself. I'm going to go see a car wash tunnel and pay for one instead.
I was just saying, I feel like really for me as on the consumer end, it's probably only there's like the expertise and the equipment, but it's also the time save. Like you're paying for the convenience of I don't have to drag the hose out, get the soap, hope my kid's going to get out of the way long enough for me to scrub it. Like
3-minute car wash. That's how we like to market it. In and out in 3 minutes.
Hey, that sounds good to me. Now, Reed, you're still really early in your career. You're only a 2014 grad. You're like a hair younger than I am. You've already hopped industries a couple times. So what do you think might be the next thing that you try and tackle?
Listen, I'm very happy in my current role, and I have no plans to move anytime soon. I will say that I have followed learning opportunities and I've followed mentorship. And so if either of those changed and I didn't feel like I was being mentored or learning in my current role, I'd potentially get frustrated and I would go looking. As long as I feel like I have that, I'm perfectly happy where I am. I don't know where I would go next. I really like investing and advising small businesses. I would probably shift towards doing that more on a full-time basis than on a part-time basis. And there's plenty of opportunity to do that kind of around the economy with continuing to invest in the small business deals that we've done. That would probably be what I would do, but that's a long way away because I'm very happy with what I'm doing now.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you are happy. So, but that being said, obviously there can be, every job has frustrations or you need to decompress. So how do you seek balance outside of work?
I seek it with mixed success. So
honesty. I love it.
Look, I think this is going to be true for a lot of people early in their career. Like you want to be successful. You want to climb. You want to learn and grow. And sometimes that means that you put in hours that are probably more than you wish you were putting in, right? But you're doing that because you think there's going to be a benefit of doing that in the long run. So there's some weeks that I have horrible work-life balance. And I think anybody who's in this stage of their career who says that, may be not telling the full truth, right? Or they found it in a way that others haven't. My goal is to be intentional about my work-life balance. And so I do try and set guardrails of, listen, if I do need to do something over the weekend, I now know that I can time box it. I can say I'll do it from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then I'll stop the rest of the day. I'm going to put work on the side and I'm going to go spend it with friends or family or what have you. If I say, hey, I know I've got something after work today, I'm going to be intentional about closing my laptop, putting my phone away, not taking my phone to dinner, and be in the moment. And if I need to log back on later to get something done, I will log back on later. You have to make time for yourself. You have to say, I like these hobbies. I like hiking. I like walking with my dog. I like skiing. Just got back from Utah 2 days ago. I was on a ski trip to Utah. Did very, very little work while I was on my ski trip. It was great. It's an intentional break, though, to do something that I love. So I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but I think being intentional about balancing working hard with doing things that take care of yourself is very important. I am sometimes very good at this. I'm sometimes not so good at this. But I'm aware of what I'd like to be doing later when I have kids that are grown, which is spend more time with them. So I'm trying to build those habits of setting guardrails in an intentional way.
Just like many things in life, definitely a journey. So, we can always all do better in that. So, even as an alum, it takes time to build these up. Like you said, you've got to learn the skills to build up boundaries or guardrails, whatever you want to call them. So Reed, we're in the very tail end of our chat today. What kinds of questions about everything we've talked about today, engineering, pharma, consulting, car washes, and entrepreneurship, did I just not think to ask? Like, what are the questions or topics I didn't understand from my own lack of knowledge in these spaces? Or maybe another way I can ask this is, what are some questions that you get from maybe any interns that you've had, junior employees, mentees, or friends and family?
Yeah, I think I get asked the question a lot, and you kind of asked around it of like, how did you end up doing this random thing that you're doing? And look, I think people tend to view careers in a very linear way because the biggest careers you learn about as a kid are very linear careers. Oh, you can become an accountant. You can become a lawyer. You can become a doctor. You can become an engineer. But in reality, the number of job descriptions out there is infinitely more than those like 4 super linear options that you learn about when you're in elementary school, right? And like when you graduated, Sean, did you know you'd be hosting a podcast on like?
I don't even think I knew I knew that they existed then, but I don't think I knew that they existed then.
And I know you do a lot more than that. I'm using that as an example of your job description, right? Like this is a subset of your broader responsibilities, but you don't really know where you're going to end up. So just admit that you don't know where you're going to end up and say, look, I'm looking for certain things. I'm looking for awesome work-life balance. Okay, there's options you can do. I'm looking for career growth and intellectual like learning. Great, there's career options you can do. Like find out what you prioritize and then don't stress about it so much. Like go look for the things that you prioritize, but the exact role might not be the exact role that you thought you'd be doing. 5 years ago, if you said I'm going to be doing mergers and acquisitions and car washes, I would have been like, what are you talking about? But I found myself over in this area. I liked it. There was an opportunity. I took it, and I am where I am. That wasn't necessarily planned. It was planned to go learn the things I wanted to learn or work for the mentors I wanted to work for. And then it just so happened that this role turned up and it ended up where I am. So I think people try to be super, super intentional about the job itself. And I would say be more intentional about what you're looking for out of the job. And the rest of it will work itself out over the course of your career.
Excellent. Now, these are the reflection questions that I asked all of our guests here. Reed, this is your chance to brag for a moment. What would you say is your biggest success to date?
I am most proud, other than meeting my lovely wife and marrying her, I am very proud of the team that we built at the manufacturing department at Spot and Tango. I think technical achievements or individual achievements have been great, and there's certainly several of those. But taking a bunch of people that didn't work together before and then building processes with them and then figuring out how to get working norms, meeting cadences, reporting schedules, like all the stuff that you need to get 5 different human beings to work together on something on a regular cadence, like helping put that together and then watching them run as I slowly stepped back and then left the company and then getting the updates now of like, it's mostly still working. It's actually way better than I ever could have even envisioned because after I got out of the way, they even took more than what I had built with them. And watching that take shape was really, really cool. Something I'm really proud of.
That's awesome. On the flip side, though, what would you say is the biggest transformational learning moment or mistake that you've made in your career? And most importantly, what you learned from it that could be helpful for our scholars to hear?
That is a great question. So this timeline probably didn't get teased out directly in our conversation so far, but I was actually overseeing the car wash at the exact same time as I was at the dog food manufacturing company. And I learned in that moment that I do have a limit to how much work I can take on. And I took on an unhealthy amount of work. And I think looking at myself in the mirror and saying, like, I have too many things going on. I'm stretched too thin, do not have a healthy work-life balance. I think that was a big learning moment for me, that there is a limit to what you can take on. I never really reached that limit, and it's kind of humbling, and it's very useful. I think everyone gets there at some point where you're like, I have bit off more than I can chew. And I had done that. And then, I did get bought and hired. And so it all kind of shifted in the right direction. It all kind of worked out. But there were some moments there, some months there where I was like, this is tougher than I thought it would be. And this is not sustainable. So that would be my one.
Well, good that you learned that early in your career and you've been able to make changes. So lessons learned. Excellent. Reed, you've talked about the importance of mentorship. And again, that's the entire point of this podcast. What advice would you give to our current scholars on how to be a good mentee and mentor to others?
My advice would be no one gets to where they are without help from others. Now, you'll hear people say, I'm a self-made person. I did it all myself. It's like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. You had advice. You had teachers. You had friends that helped you out. Everyone got to where they are because of the help of others. Pay it forward. Pay it forward. And find people who have a view of paying it forward as your mentor. Those people exist. They're all over the place. You just have to look for them. And those are the good people that will help you out and give you advice. They're not gonna make something happen for you. They're not gonna get you the job, but they might have a snippet of information that helps in an interview. or they may have, gone to school with somebody 5 years ago that's in the exact role in the exact city that you want to be in, and maybe they know somebody. Like, you never know, and so always ask if people are willing to help out. If you hear no, it's fine. Go find someone else, and then be willing to help others out and continue to pay it forward.
Excellent. Now, you've name dropped a couple of folks throughout our conversation this afternoon. Again, we recorded on a Friday afternoon, so it's gone off the rails a few times. But are there any other folks that you want to give a shout out to from your scholar days?
Yeah, so I mentioned a few people. Obviously Dr. Curtis, who helped me with my thesis, he was a big influence of my love for biotechnology, and that was the first place that I landed. There was a group of people that I studied chemical engineering with, and we spent an unbelievable amount of hours studying chemical engineering together. And so I'll give them a shout out. One of them is Paul Suey, who has been on this podcast before.
Yep, sure has. Go back and check that out as soon as you're done watching or listening to this one.
Paul's a great guy. Also a very nonlinear career, who hopped around a few times in my year. So he's got an interesting story. Taylor Mahar, who was in that group, and then Mike Schrenk and Joel Salem. Joel Salem, who I just skied with in Utah, another guy I keep in touch with. So that group of guys that we studied together, I mean, the number of late nights in the library working on chemi, we wouldn't have got through it without each other. So big shout out to them. Excellent
group of people then. Now, as we're wrapping up our time, what's a final piece of advice that you want our scholars to take away from our conversation today, particularly around making the most of their time at Penn State, in the Schreyer Honors College, or early in their career?
Yeah, I think enjoy college would be my advice. Don't stress out too much. You will be okay. You will get good enough grades. You might not get all A's the way you did in high school. College is harder. It's okay to get a B. Don't stress too much, but keep your grades up, have fun, join the club that you're on the fence about joining and try it out. Take the trip that your friends are trying to plan that you're not quite sure if you can afford, but like if you pinch pennies and you could probably make it work, like go enjoy college because you'll never get another shot at it, right? Like it's 4 transformative years of your life, and make sure you have a good time while you're there.
Amen to that. Reed, if scholars watching or listening want to get in touch with you and continue this conversation, get more insights from you, what's the best way that they can do that?
LinkedIn.
And finally, the hard-hitting question here at the end on a Friday afternoon when we're recording. If you were a flavor of Berkey Creamery ice cream, which would you be? And as a Scholar alum, most importantly, why would you be that flavor?
So I left this question until the last minute and procrastinated, but I picked this out earlier today. I am the entrepreneurship monkey business. One, I'm a blend of flavors, a blend of experiences from my background. And 2, it's got the word entrepreneur in it. And so it's jumped off the page because I took the leap and bought a small business as an entrepreneur.
That is excellent. And if you go back and listen to our crossover episode with the Dare to Disrupt podcast from Invent Penn State, you can hear more about maybe the genesis of that flavor with Dr. James Delatry, who is in charge of that area of the university. So go check that one out after you listen to the episode with your friend Paul Suey, who tying in EVs. All these things are all connecting today, Reed.
All connected.
Well, thank you, Reed, for joining us and sharing your insights. Before I let you have the last word, scholars, if you're watching here on the video version, be sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave us a comment. If you're engaging with the audio version, be sure to follow us on whatever podcast app that you're listening to us today. And with that, Reed, I'm going to let you have the last word to close this out here today.
Go Penn State. We are.